and sort of an opportunity to practice. A role play can be quite good for freeing them because they can take on another role, obviously, and then they can sort of feel less inhibited than they do when they're perhaps talking as themselves.
And do you use role play quite a lot?
Yeah.
For that reason?
Yeah, yeah. And I find, particularly with younger, sort of teenagers, younger adults, it works really well because they often feel quite self-conscious speaking another language and they feel quite strange, but if they can take on another role, it sort of frees them.
They don't feel responsible so much for what they're saying.
Yeah. And also it gets them, they can try language that they wouldn't ordinarily use just in everyday conversations. They can sort of, I don't know, talk as a role.
You used quite a lot of pair work and group work in the lesson. Why did you do that?
Well, for things like the prediction for the reading task, I think it's quite good for them to be able to share ideas initially, because I think if you just ask a class for their responses, they might not have ideas or they might not feel confident about their ideas. Whereas if they've already shared some ideas and they feel a bit more confident about doing that. And also, of course, it gives them an opportunity to practice speaking.
And when they were doing the speaking, you didn't correct them very often, and that's a conscious decision on your part, I think.
Yeah. Again, sort of about confidence, really. If you're constantly correcting them, they might sort of feel slightly inhibited in that they don't want to talk. I'm more interested in getting fluency and getting the message across, so long as it doesn't necessarily cause like a breakdown in communication. I think it's quite a good thing just to let them go. And I tend to sort of note down errors and then look at those later, because it's important, obviously, to have both.
And so you pick up some stuff to work on while they're talking?
Yeah. Notice sort of if they've made a mistake like a slip, just something to point out and just kind of say, oh, I don't know, they missed off the S, whether he and she verb or something like that. Or if they've made a mistake because they didn't know how to say something, kind of try to reformulate and say, okay, you said this, I think this is what you mean, and just kind of try to input there. So.
But quite specifically, not sort of interrupting right in the middle of everything and then stopping it.
Yeah.
There was a very enjoyable moment in the middle of the lesson where you start teaching them how to say ish and then time and your greenish skirt and things like that. Was that planned? Was that something you were going to do?
Well, they seemed interested in it, and it seemed something that like they were sort of slightly quizzical as to what it was, so you had their interest already. I just think it's quite a nice little thing-ish, and something that wouldn't necessarily be in a course book or something.
At one point in the lesson, you got all the students into the middle of the room and had them working in a group in the middle of the room. Why did you do that?
I think it's good sometimes for a change of focus. And I think particularly at the end of a lesson, it can be nice because people get tired. And if they're just sitting, perhaps their energy might start to sort of flag. And if you get them up, it kind of renews everybody and it starts to get things moving. And sort of with their minds as well, start sort of working again, and they kind of wake up. And also it gives people an opportunity to work with people that they don't necessarily always work with. For example, if they always sit next to a certain person in the classroom, they always talk to them, so they don't get a chance to talk to the man who sits over there. So this kind of thing gives everybody a chance to speak to everybody, and they can obviously learn more things.
And you also had that thing where they moved around.
Yeah, so again, you're getting them to speak to a range of different people. So in that, they're getting to talk to different people, they're getting to listen to different accents, and they're also, they're making friends as well.
Yeah, you based your lesson on this guy looking for a wife and speed dating, that kind of thing. Can you think of any situations where you'd be uncomfortable about using that material or not?
I tend to use that material quite often, and basically love and relationships are something that everybody can relate to, so it tends to be engaging for everyone. But perhaps in certain cultural backgrounds it might be viewed as risque, I suppose. You always have to be sensitive about the material that you're using, and you don't want to offend anybody, of course. So I guess it depends on knowing your students and knowing where you can take them, basically, and understanding where they come from and what their interests are and stuff like that. But generally that topic goes down a treat.
My name's Rolf, and I've been involved in EFL for over 10 years, mainly in this country, specialising in exam classes. And recently, over the last couple of years, I've been doing some workshops in different countries in Europe, teacher training workshops, trying to kind of remotivate teachers who have lost some of their edge.
How do you think the lesson went?
For its purposes and aims, it progressed nicely. It achieved, I think, pretty much what I expected it to.
Could you just expand on that?
The lesson has two main aims, one of which is to enable the students to use and understand a piece of grammar and kind of grammatical structure. And in that aspect, it was achieving what I hoped it would for the stronger members of the class, but the weaker students, I think, needed a little bit more structured, traditional examination of the structure to get used to it. And the second one, which is a little bit more abstract, is about getting the students to become aware that they are able to use grammar without actually knowing they're using it.
So that was the dictogloss part of the lesson. Could you just explain dictogloss?
Yep, I use a slight adaptation. Dictogloss is a kind of dictation. And the difference is that students get to hear things one time and at very natural speed. It's very important not to drop the level. And they sit and relax and try to gather as much information as possible. Then they hear it again, one sentence at a time. And this time they can take notes, but again, it's at natural speed, so they don't have a lot of options for getting all the words down. So what they do is they filter it, and they take the words that they can understand and the ideas they can understand. Then they go back together into groups and reconstruct using all the separate little pieces that each of them has gathered. And they each gather different things. And as they discuss, they learn to understand what it is they've heard.
So you use dictogloss in this lesson, you use the story to introduce the grammar, and you do this quite often, but what other kind of ways do you introduce grammar?
I'm a real kind of proponent of not letting the students know what we're going to be doing before we actually do it.
Yeah.
I can introduce grammar, we do it quite a lot with newspaper articles, which I've already selected, which have that piece of grammar in. And we deal with it just as a topic, and then look at it in terms of grammar. Songs, clips from movies, videos, DVDs, and the typical approach of using a basic course book or something as well, just for variety. So as many different ways as I can possibly use.
The next question is a bit of a dangerous question come out because I have no idea what your answer is going to be, but it's a question we've been longing to ask you. Do you get on with your brother?
I do. The story is totally fictional. Absolutely fictional. I found that students respond better to stories if they feel real, and rather than a construct from a book which has characters which have no basis for the students. The students spend a lot of time with you and they build up some kind of rapport. But no, my brother was absolutely lovely and he never broke any of my toys.
I'm Silvana and I've been teaching English for 19 years now. I moved to the UK 6 years ago, so before then I taught in English in Argentina. I taught general English, English for specific purposes, and I'm also a teacher trainer.
You used an interactive whiteboard in this lesson. Why did you choose to use a board?
I'm very lucky. In the college where I work, we have, at least in my department, one interactive whiteboard per classroom. So when we first had them, I've decided I'll train myself and learn to use them, and I've never looked back really since then. I think they're very, very useful. There are so many advantages to them. Things like being able to have the students interact with the whiteboard, touch and come and drag and drop and type and write. And also, we also have a virtual learning environment, so whatever we produce during the class, we can save and students can access at home, and it's amazing the things you can do with them.
Critics of smartboards, interactive whiteboards, often worry about what the board does to the interaction in the lesson and to the way students behave, and certainly in issues like having to dim lights and things like that. Do you see any disadvantages of the board in that kind of way?
I think it's got to do with how much or how little the teacher lets the whiteboard take over. to me, it's about the teacher's judgment and how much you let it dominate your class or not. The disadvantage could be that you can't always rely 100% on technology. You have to be very careful that you've got a contingency plan because, come one day, something's gone wrong, and what do you do? That's, to me, is the main disadvantage. But how much, you let the whiteboard be an obstacle, it's up to the teacher and the teacher's management of the tool. It's one more tool.
Can I shift the conversation completely? There's a lot of discussion about the difference between native speaker teachers and non-native speaker teachers. Now, although those terms are not very satisfactory, I suppose I'd have to categorise you as a non-native speaker teacher. And I think the question that interests me is whether you see any particular advantages or disadvantages in being, well, either a native speaker teacher or a non-native speaker teacher.
I think as a disadvantage, if students really want a native speaker model, well, I'm not. And in terms of pronunciation or length or the breadth of the vocabulary that a native speaker teacher would have, I'm sure I make many more mistakes than a native speaker. And I think those could be the disadvantages. Advantages, I can also see many. I learned English, so I know what it is like to be on the learner side, to be in their shoes. And I know what's easy and what's difficult, at least for those who speak my mother tongue. I know the pain of having to go home and memorize sheets and sheets of vocabulary for hours, and my knowledge of the language in terms of my, the grammar and pronunciation and all that, I think it's sound and good, and I feel confident about it because I had to learn it. I think that my starting point as a teacher was much more solid than somebody coming out of, initial teacher training in a short course. They tend to be very clear on their methodology, but not so much on the language awareness. And I think that non-native teachers tend to have a better language awareness because of that. They had to learn the language.
How do students respond to you as a non-native speaker teacher, both here in the UK and in your own country?
When I was at home in Argentina, students liked to have a combination of both native and non-native speaker teachers. They liked having the native speakers in conversation lessons and for their vocabulary, but they liked to have the non-native speaker teacher for their grammar lessons. When I came to the UK, some of my directors of studies did not like me to let them know that I wasn't English. Especially, I can understand that. It's probably got to do with the fact that people come to the UK to have an English teacher. So not having one could, be a problem. But once they do find out, especially Spanish speakers love it because they can ask me questions in Spanish. And sometimes, they need, especially at very, very low levels, they like having somebody they can talk in their own mother tongue.
So for you, it's actually quite ideal to teach people whose mother tongue you share or whose mother tongue you can operate with.
Oh yes. I really enjoy the opportunity to do cross-linguistic comparisons from time to time and to have the mother tongue not as an obstacle or a barrier, but actually as a tool to help them in their learning.
Hi, my name's Tony. I've been teaching in Hastings for 2 years. I would like to teach abroad at some point, but not just yet. I absolutely love teaching. I love meeting people from all over the world, and it's just a lot of fun.
What was your objective for this lesson?
The objective was to introduce metaphorical language to the class. Obviously, we discuss metaphorical language in the class, but it's usually as a by the by. But this was to actually focus specifically on that.
How long had you known that group?
Yeah, for about five months.
What's the difference between teaching a group you've known for a long time and teaching a group you've only just met?
Well, there are big differences. A class that you've had for a long time understand how you work. They know what you're going to do or what certain signals mean. With a new class, expressions and body language can sometimes be confusing. But as soon as they've understood what you mean, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to get at, it's fine. Yeah, but it takes a bit of getting used to. But also the rapport in the classes. You need to build up trust with your students, and that can't just happen straight away. You know, I think they trust you once they've seen that you're on their side and you're working with them, not against them.
Why is rapport important?
I think rapport is extremely important because I think a class has to enjoy their lessons, and they have to enjoy working not just with the teacher but together, students with students. And I've had classes before where rapport has been really poor, and it's reflected in the whole lesson. So I always make it a priority to build up rapport as quickly, as soon as possible.
How did you follow this lesson up? Did it lead on to anything else, or was it a one-off?
What we did subsequently was we went to the library, got them all to choose some readers, so obviously some good advanced readers, and obviously gave them an aim while reading, which to pick out similar language to the language that we'd looked at in the lesson. Obviously gave them a week to read the books, and then we had a discussion a week later with them, basically just throwing up all the language that they came across, and just had an in-depth discussion on that.